The crystal champagne flute shattered in my hand when Victoria stood, tapping her fork against her glass with that smug smile I'd grown to detest over 7 years of marriage to her son. "Everyone, I have a wonderful announcement to make," she declared, her voice carrying across Mariposa's private dining room. My mother-in-law's eyes gleamed as she placed her hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Daniel has finally found someone worthy of the Castillo name. Someone who understands family values and will give us the grandchildren we've been waiting for." The room fell silent as every head turned toward me, blood dripping from my palm where the broken glass had cut into my skin. Victoria had no idea that the restaurant she'd chosen for our anniversary dinner, the restaurant where she was now announcing my replacement, belonged to me. I'd purchased it 3 years ago with my grandmother's inheritance, the same grandmother Victoria had called just a cook at our wedding. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend me, to say something, anything. Instead, he stared at his plate, his silence confirming everything. Blood continued to trickle down my wrist and onto the pristine white tablecloth as I reached beneath my chair and retrieved the folder I'd brought tonight for a completely different reason. I'd planned to reveal my success, to finally tell Daniel and his family about my secret ownership of one of Westlake's most acclaimed restaurants. Now I was about to serve something else entirely. I stood, my legs surprisingly steady beneath me. "Before we toast to Daniel and Sophia's future," I said, my voice calm despite the hurricane raging inside me, "I have my own announcement." I slid the folder across the table to Daniel. "Happy anniversary, darling. These are divorce papers. And Victoria," I turned to my mother-in-law, whose champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips, "thank you for choosing my restaurant for this special occasion. The staff always appreciates your generous tips." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 7 years earlier, I had stood beneath a flower-draped arbor, looking into Daniel Castillo's eyes as we exchanged vows that promised forever. The April breeze carried the scent of jasmine and new beginnings as the justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife. Daniel's family had initially opposed our marriage. Their son, the marketing executive from one of Westlake's most prominent families, marrying Elena Reyes, a chef with dreams they deemed impractical. But Daniel had defended me then, standing firm against his mother's disapproval. "They'll come around," he'd promised, kissing me beneath a canopy of stars at our modest reception. "Once they see how happy you make me, they'll welcome you with open arms." I had believed him. Wanted to believe him. The Daniel I fell in love with had been my champion, my partner, the man who'd sit for hours in my tiny apartment kitchen sampling experimental dishes and offering genuine feedback. He'd called my culinary ambitions inspiring and my heritage recipes revolutionary. He'd made me believe I could be more than my working-class background suggested, more than just the daughter of immigrants who'd spent their lives working in other people's kitchens. That Daniel had disappeared gradually, like a sauce reducing, too long on the stove, slowly losing its vibrant notes until only a concentrated, unrecognizable reduction remained. I first noticed the change after our second anniversary. Daniel began working later, missing the dinners I'd carefully prepared. My culinary creativity, once charming, became time-consuming and impractical. When I discussed opening my own restaurant someday, his encouragement transformed into pragmatic concerns about finances and stability. Meanwhile, his mother's subtle criticisms about my cooking, my background, my career aspirations went increasingly unchallenged. When my grandmother passed away shortly after our 4th anniversary, leaving me her modest savings and handwritten recipe collection, Victoria had referred to the inheritance as quaint and suggested I use it for something sensible rather than that restaurant fantasy. Daniel, who once would have defended my dreams, had simply nodded in agreement. I'd smiled politely, excused myself to the restroom, and cried silently behind the locked door, mourning not just my grandmother, but also the gradual disappearance of the man I'd married. That evening, I made a decision that altered the course of my life. I would pursue my dream without Daniel's knowledge or support. It took 6 months of covert planning, working with my best friend Olivia as a silent partner, finding the perfect location, a struggling Mediterranean restaurant with excellent bones, and negotiating its purchase. We renamed it Mariposa, Butterfly, in Spanish, a tribute to my grandmother who always told me transformation requires patience. I hired a manager to handle the public-facing aspects of ownership while I worked behind the scenes crafting the menu, training the kitchen staff, building something that was entirely mine. To Daniel and his family, I maintained the fiction that I was simply consulting for various restaurants while teaching part-time at the Culinary Institute. The lie felt necessary, a protective cocoon around the one part of myself I refused to surrender to their diminishment. I told myself I would reveal the truth when Mariposa was successful enough to silence even Victoria's criticism. In 3 years, Mariposa had transformed from a struggling eatery to one of Westlake's most respected dining establishments, earning accolades from regional food critics and a devoted clientele. Each achievement I celebrated silently, each positive review I savored alone, storing them away like treasures in a vault no one else could access. When Daniel suggested celebrating our 7th anniversary at Mariposa, that new place everyone's talking about, I'd felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Pride that my creation had impressed him, pain that he didn't know it was mine, and a strange sense of anticipation. Finally, I thought, the perfect opportunity to reveal my success. I'd carefully planned the evening, arranging with my staff to serve Daniel's favorite dishes with personalized touches only a wife would know. I'd prepared a small presentation revealing my ownership, complete with our first profitable quarters. Financial statement, proof that my impractical dream was now a thriving business. I'd imagined surprise, then pride, perhaps even a rekindling of the respect that had gradually eroded between us. I never imagined I'd be the one receiving a revelation instead. The signs had been there, of course. The late nights at the office, the business trips that extended unexpectedly, the growing emotional distance, the way he'd stopped asking about my day, my work, my thoughts. I'd attributed it to the natural evolution of a long-term relationship, to the demands of his recently earned promotion, to anything but the obvious truth. When Daniel suggested inviting his family to our anniversary dinner, I should have recognized the red flag for what it was. An anniversary celebration should be intimate, just the two of us. But I'd convinced myself that their presence would make my revelation about Mariposa even more impactful. After years of their dismissal, I would finally prove my worth. Instead, I'd discovered my worthlessness in their eyes. Now, as I stood in Mariposa's dining room with 7 pairs of eyes fixed on me, Daniel's, Victoria's, Sophia's, Daniel's father Robert's, his brother Jason's and wife Camilla's, and my sous chef Miguel's, who had emerged from the kitchen at the commotion, I felt an unexpected calm descend over me. The initial shock gave way to clarity, as if a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape I should have recognized long ago. "Elena," Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and placating, the tone he used when trying to manage difficult clients. "You're making a scene. Let's discuss this privately." "A scene?" I echoed, looking pointedly at Sophia, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth as her fingers nervously twisted the napkin in her lap. "I believe that privilege was already claimed by your mother's announcement." Victoria recovered her composure, her initial shock hardening into indignation. "This is exactly the kind of emotional overreaction that confirms what I've always said. You were never Castillo material." "Mother, please," Daniel interjected, but without the conviction of a man defending his wife. "No, Victoria, please continue," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Tell me more about how I'm being replaced while sitting in my restaurant, eating food from my menu, being served by staff that I hired. Your restaurant? Robert, my father-in-law, spoke for the first time, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in confusion. What are you talking about? I reached into my purse and withdrew my business cards. Simple, elegant rectangles of heavy cream cardstock bearing Mariposa's embossed logo, and my name followed by Executive Chef and Owner. I placed one in front of each of them, saving Daniel's for last. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mariposa has been mine for 3 years, I explained, a strange pride overshadowing the pain momentarily. I purchased it with my grandmother's inheritance. You know, the money you suggested I use for something sensible, Victoria. The shock on their faces would have been satisfying under different circumstances. Daniel stared at the business card as if it were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. That's impossible, he finally said. You would have told me. We have joint finances. Not entirely, I corrected him. I maintained my personal account from before our marriage. The one you said was fine to keep for spending money, since it was such a small amount. Amazing how those small amounts accumulate when you're not spending them on the designer clothes your mother keeps suggesting would make me look more appropriate. Jason, Daniel's brother, let out a low whistle that earned him a sharp look from his wife. He had always been the family rebel, the one who occasionally showed me kindness when others didn't, though clearly not enough kindness to warn me about Daniel and Sophia. How long? I asked Daniel, though part of me already knew the answer. The question wasn't really about the duration, but about confirming the extent of the betrayal. Daniel at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Elena, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place, I interrupted. How long have you been seeing Sophia? Sophia looked up then, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. 8 months, she admitted quietly. But Daniel said your marriage was already over in all but name, that you were both just going through the motions. I laughed then, a hollow sound that echoed in the private dining room. Is that what you told her, Daniel? That our marriage was over? Interesting, since just last week you were discussing having children soon. Daniel's face flushed, and I knew I'd caught him in yet another lie. He'd been telling each of us what we wanted to hear: Sophia that his marriage was ending, me that it was about to deepen, his mother that he was handling the situation. I think, I said, gathering my purse and the folder containing the real financial documents I'd planned to share tonight, that this anniversary dinner is over. The meal, of course, is on the house. Consider it my parting gift to the Castillo family. I turned to leave, determined to maintain my composure until I was safely away from their judgmental eyes. But Victoria's voice stopped me. This is ridiculous, Elena. You're overreacting as usual. Daniel has made a mistake. Yes, but throwing away 7 years of marriage over one indiscretion is childish. A mature woman would work through this. I turned back slowly, taking in Victoria's imperious expression, the way she sat straight-backed and certain in her moral authority despite having just participated in humiliating her daughter-in-law. A mature woman, I replied, measuring each word carefully, recognizes when she's being devalued by people who should cherish her. A mature woman doesn't compete for a place at her own table. And a mature woman, I added, meeting Daniel's gaze, directly, certainly doesn't waste her time with a man who allows his mother to announce his affair at his anniversary dinner. I moved toward the door again, but paused when Daniel called my name, his voice holding a note of panic I'd never heard before. Elena, wait, please. We can talk about this. I can explain everything. I looked back at my husband, the man who had once been my biggest supporter and had gradually become my most insidious detractor, and felt nothing but a profound weariness. There's nothing to explain, Daniel. Your mother has made everything perfectly clear. I gestured to Miguel, who had been watching the scene unfold with professional discretion. Miguel, please ensure the Castillos have everything they need. I'll be taking the rest of the evening off. Miguel nodded, his expression conveying the solidarity of someone who had witnessed too many entitled customers to be shocked by family drama. Of course, chef. I'll take care of everything. I walked out of Mariposa with my head high, past the main dining room where unsuspecting patrons enjoyed their meals in the warm, inviting atmosphere I'd so carefully crafted. The host caught my eye, concern evident in his expression, but I gave a slight shake of my head. Tonight's implosion would not disrupt the experience of our guests. I was a professional after all. The cool April air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the same jasmine-scented breeze that had carried such promise exactly 7 years ago, now feeling like a mockery. I had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to be anywhere but there. My hand throbbed where the champagne flute had cut it, blood now dried in a rusty streak across my palm. I hadn't even felt it happen. I walked aimlessly through downtown Westlake, past storefronts and cafes, through the park where Daniel had proposed, alongside the marina where we'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. The city that had been the backdrop to our marriage now seemed like a museum of memories I needed to recontextualize. I found myself at the harbor's edge, staring out at the boats gently rocking in their moorings, lights reflecting on the dark water like fallen stars. My phone buzzed repeatedly in. My purse. Calls from Daniel, no doubt, now that he'd had time to craft his explanation, his defense, his strategy for managing this crisis. I silenced it without looking. Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand without judgment. Olivia, I need you. My voice cracked, the composure I'd maintained in front of the Castillos finally fracturing. I'm on my way, she replied without hesitation. Where are you? 30 minutes later, Olivia's Mini Cooper pulled up alongside the harbor walkway. She took one look at my face, my blood-stained hand, my elegant anniversary dress now rumpled from sitting on a park bench, and opened her arms. I collapsed into them, finally allowing the tears I'd been holding back. He's been having an affair, I managed between sobs. With someone from his office, for 8 months. His mother announced it at our anniversary dinner at Mariposa. Olivia's body stiffened with indignation. She did what? Through broken sentences, I relayed the evening's events, Victoria's announcement, Sophia's presence, Daniel's silence, my revelation about owning Mariposa, the divorce papers I hadn't actually prepared but had mentioned in the heat of the moment. That manipulative, gaslighting family, Olivia muttered, stroking my hair as if I were a child. I've wanted to tell you for years how they undermine you, but I was afraid you'd think I was being overprotective. You should have told me, I said without real anger. I needed someone to confirm I wasn't imagining things. I know, she sighed. I'm sorry. I thought it would be better coming from you, that you needed to see it for yourself. She pulled back to look at my injured hand. Come on, let's get this cleaned up and figure out next steps. You can stay with me tonight. As we drove to her apartment, I stared out the window at the passing cityscape, the streets and buildings that had formed the backdrop of my married life. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. I wasn't just leaving Daniel. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had gradually dimmed to accommodate his family's expectations. Do you think I should have seen this coming? I asked Olivia as she cleaned and bandaged my cut palm in her bathroom. She considered the question carefully, applying antiseptic with gentle precision. I think you saw it but didn't want to believe it. We all have blind spots when it comes to people we love. I don't even know if I still love him, I admitted. The realization, both painful and freeing. I've been so focused on proving myself to his family, on building Mariposa, on maintaining this image of a successful marriage, that I haven't stopped to examine what I actually feel anymore. Olivia secured the bandage and squeezed my uninjured hand. That's the first thing you need to figure out then. Not for Daniel or his awful mother, but for yourself. Do you want to save your marriage? The question hung in the air between us, weighty and demanding. 6 hours ago, I would have answered unhesitatingly in the affirmative. Now, I wasn't sure. What would I be saving? A relationship where I'd been steadily diminished? A partnership with someone who had been unfaithful for over half a year? A connection to a family that had never truly accepted me? I don't know, I finally answered, my voice small in the quiet bathroom. I need time to think. Space to breathe. Then that's what you'll get, Olivia said decisively. Starting now. She helped me into a pair of her pajamas, made up the guest bed, and brought me a mug of chamomile tea laced with honey, my comfort drink since childhood. As I sipped it, curled up against her oversized pillows, my phone buzzed again. Daniel's name illuminated the screen, along with a notification indicating he'd called 12 times and left 8 messages. Do you want to answer? Olivia asked. I stared at his name, at the photo of us that appeared with his calls, a candid shot from 3 years ago, both of us laughing at something now forgotten. His arm around my shoulders, my head tilted toward him in easy affection. When had we last looked at each other that way? When had his touch last felt like a connection rather than an obligation? No, I decided, silencing the phone again. Whatever he has to say can wait until I'm ready to hear it. That night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of broken glass and butterflies trapped in display cases, of kitchens where the burners wouldn't light, and dining rooms where guests spoke in languages I couldn't understand. I woke repeatedly, disoriented, in the unfamiliar room, the reality of my situation crashing back each time with renewed force. By morning, Daniel had called 23 times, left 17 messages, and sent 32 texts. I reviewed them over coffee at Olivia's kitchen island, her cat Jasper purring against my leg as if sensing my distress. The messages followed, a predictable pattern. Initial demands for conversation, followed by defensive explanations, then apologies, finally devolving into desperate pleas. The affair wasn't serious, he claimed. Victoria had misunderstood the situation. Sophia was just a colleague who had developed feelings for him. He had been planning to end it. He still loved me. We could work through this. We belonged together. Nowhere did he address the years of subtle undermining, the gradual erosion of support for my dreams, the way he had allowed his family to treat me as somehow less than. Even now, he seemed incapable of seeing the larger pattern, focusing instead on the single incident of infidelity as if it existed in isolation from everything else. The final message had come at 4:17 a.m. Please, Elena, I can't lose you. Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it. Olivia read over my shoulder, her expression grim. That's manipulative too, you know. Putting the responsibility on you to tell him how to fix what he broke. Classic Daniel. I nodded, recognizing the truth in her assessment. Even Daniel's contrition came with an abdication of responsibility, a subtle shifting of the emotional labor onto my shoulders. What are you going to do? Olivia asked, refilling my coffee cup. I stared into the dark liquid, watching the cream create swirling patterns as it dispersed. I need to get away for a while. Somewhere he can't find me easily. Somewhere I can think without his voice or his mother's in my head. The Pinecrest cabin, Olivia suggested immediately. My uncle rents it out, but it's available for the next 2 weeks. 3 hours from here in the mountains. No neighbors for half a mile, great kitchen, terrible cell reception. Perfect, I agreed, feeling the first stirrings of something like relief. I'll need to make arrangements for Mariposa, pack some things. Olivia was already typing on her phone. I'll confirm the cabin. Miguel can handle Mariposa. He's been ready for more responsibility anyway. As for packing, we'll stop by your house when Daniel's at work. I hesitated, contemplating the logistics of dismantling a 7-year marriage, even temporarily. I should talk to him before I go. Not in person, I added quickly, seeing Olivia's expression. But he deserves to know I'm leaving, that I need space. Agreed, Olivia said. But first, you need legal advice. By noon, I had a consultation scheduled with Amara Patterson, a divorce attorney Olivia knew through her yoga studio. By 2, I had a clear understanding of my rights, the steps required to file for divorce if I chose that path, and the importance of documenting assets, including clear records of Mariposa's ownership and finances. Don't make any hasty decisions, Amara had advised, but do protect yourself. Daniel will likely retain counsel quickly once he realizes you're serious about separating, and the Castillo family has significant resources and connections. With Amara's guidance, I drafted a text to Daniel that was clear and direct without being inflammatory. Daniel, I am taking time away to process what happened and decide what I want for my future. I need space and will not be responding to calls or messages for the foreseeable future. I have retained legal counsel and request that you communicate with me only through her if absolutely necessary. I included Amara's contact information and pressed send before I could reconsider. His response was immediate. Elena, please don't do this. We can work this out. I'll do whatever you want. Counseling, separation, anything. Just don't shut me out. I didn't reply. When Olivia and I arrived at the Craftsman house, Daniel and I had purchased 3 years earlier, another decision driven more by his family's expectations than our personal preferences, I felt like a stranger entering someone else's home. The tasteful furnishings Victoria had helped select, the neutral color palette that was more appropriate for entertaining, the conspicuous absence of any elements reflecting my Hispanic heritage, all of it suddenly seemed like evidence of my gradual erasure. I packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, my grandmother's recipe collection, the handmade ceramic bowl my brother Marcus had given me for my 30th birthday, my favorite knives and essential cooking tools. I avoided looking at the photographs, displayed on shelves and walls, images of a couple who no longer existed in the form captured by those frames. In our home office, I gathered important documents: my birth certificate, passport, the deed to Mariposa, financial records I'd maintained, separately from our joint accounts. I hesitated at the drawer containing our marriage certificate, then closed it without removing the document. That decision could wait. As we were loading the last bags into Olivia's car, a sleek Audi pulled into the driveway. Daniel emerged, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from what appeared to be a sleepless night. I knew you'd come here, he said, approaching rapidly. Elena, we need to talk. You can't just leave. Olivia stepped between us, her posture protective. She absolutely can, Daniel, and she asked you to communicate through her attorney. Daniel ignored her, his focus entirely on me. 8 years together, and you're running away without even a conversation? That's not the Elena I know. The Elena you know, I found myself replying, my voice steadier than I expected, is someone who has been shrinking herself to fit into the space your family allocated for her. I'm rediscovering the woman I was before that happened. That's not fair, he protested. I've always supported you. Have you? I challenged, meeting his gaze directly. When was the last time you defended me to your mother? When did you last express genuine interest in my work? When did you stop seeing me, Daniel? He faltered, momentarily speechless. And in that hesitation, I saw everything I needed to know. He couldn't answer because he knew I was right. I love you, he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. Doesn't that count for anything? I studied his face, the face I had woken up beside for 7 years, the face I had once believed held all my future happiness. Now I saw the subtle manipulations in his expression, the practiced vulnerability designed to elicit a specific response. "Love without respect isn't love at all," I said quietly. "It's possession, and I refuse to be anyone's possession any longer." I turned away, moving toward Olivia's car with deliberate steps. "Where are you going?" Daniel called after me. "When will you be back?" I paused, one hand on the car door. I don't know the answer to either question, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty feels like freedom rather than failure. As Olivia pulled away from the curb, I watched Daniel grow smaller in the side mirror, a solitary figure standing in front of the house that had never really been my home. The pain in my chest was real, but different from what I'd expected. Not the sharp agony of a heartbreaking, but the deep ache of muscles stretching after too long in a constrained position. The winding mountain road seemed to carry me farther from my old life, with each curve and switchback. Olivia's Mini Cooper handled the ascent admirably, hugging the road as we climbed higher into the pine-covered hills. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the dashboard. 3 hours of driving had passed in a strange blur of conversation and companionable silence, neither of us fully addressing the magnitude of what had happened, what was happening still. "You're sure you want to do this alone?" Olivia asked as we turned onto the gravel drive leading to Pinecrest Cabin. "I can stay a few days. I have projects I could work on remotely." I glanced at my best friend, taking in the concern etched in her features. Olivia had been my rock since culinary school, the one person who had never wavered in her support of my ambitions. She had invested in Mariposa when everyone else thought my dreams were impractical, had celebrated every success and comforted every setback. She deserved better than to spend her vacation days babysitting me through a marital crisis. "I'm sure," I said, squeezing her hand. "I need to hear myself think without anyone else's voice influencing me, even yours." The cabin emerged around the next bend, a sturdy structure of weathered cedar and stone that seemed to grow naturally from the mountainside. It wasn't particularly large or luxurious, but it exuded a quiet dignity that immediately resonated with me. A wide porch wrapped around two sides, overlooking a stunning valley view on one end and nestling against the forest on the other. "It's perfect," I breathed, feeling the first genuine smile in days lift the corners of my mouth. We unloaded my belongings: clothes, books, cooking supplies, and the box of documents Amara had advised me to keep secure. Olivia's uncle had stocked the kitchen with basic provisions as promised, though I'd brought several bags of specialty ingredients. Cooking had always been my therapy, my meditation, my way of processing emotions too complex for words. I anticipated doing a lot of cooking in the coming days. "The nearest store is about 20 minutes down the mountain," Olivia explained as we put away groceries. "Cell service is spotty at best, but the landline works, and there's surprisingly decent internet. My uncle rents this place to writers sometimes. Emergency numbers are by the phone." I nodded, mentally cataloging the information while arranging spices in alphabetical order, an old habit that always centered me. The kitchen was surprisingly well equipped for a rental property: gas range, decent knives, heavy-bottomed pots hanging from a ceiling rack. I could work here. When everything was settled, Olivia and I stood somewhat awkwardly on the porch, both recognizing the moment of departure had arrived. "I'll check in every few days," she promised, pulling me into a fierce hug. "And you can? Call any time. Spotty cell service be damned." "I'll be fine," I assured her, returning the embrace. "I just need time to figure out what I want, who I am without all the noise." After Olivia's car disappeared down the gravel drive, I stood on the porch listening to the profound silence of the mountains. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, no restaurant kitchen's controlled chaos. Just wind in the pines, an occasional bird call, and the distant murmur of a stream somewhere nearby. The vastness of the quiet pressed against my eardrums, almost uncomfortable after years of city living. Inside, I moved through the cabin's rooms, familiarizing myself with what would be my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. The main space combined, living and dining areas with the kitchen, all anchored by a river rock fireplace. A small study occupied one corner, complete with a desk positioned to capture the valley view. The bedroom was simply furnished but comfortable, with windows on 2 walls and a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green covering the queen-sized bed. The bathroom featured an old-fashioned clawfoot tub deep enough for proper soaking, unpacked methodically, hanging clothes in the cedar-scented closet, arranging toiletries in the bathroom, placing my grandmother's recipe collection on the bedside table. Each item I positioned felt like a small act of reclamation. These things were mine, not chosen to please Daniel or meet his family's expectations. Even the clothes I'd packed reflected this awakening, favoring comfort and personal preference over the carefully curated wardrobe Victoria had helped assemble, befitting Daniel's position. As darkness fell, I prepared a simple dinner: pasta, with olive oil, garlic, and the heirloom tomatoes I'd brought from Westlake. I ate on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the mountain chill, watching stars emerge in a sky untainted by city lights. The food was nothing special by my professional standards, but it satisfied something deeper than hunger, the primal comfort of nourishment prepared by one's own hands. Later, I drew a bath and soaked until my fingers wrinkled, letting the hot, water-ease muscles I hadn't realized were clenched tight with tension. My injured palm stung slightly in the water, the cut from the champagne glass a visceral reminder of the moment everything changed. I examined it dispassionately. Not deep, enough to need stitches, but likely to leave a scar. It seemed fitting to carry a physical mark of that night. In bed, surrounded by unfamiliar shadows and the creaking sounds of the cabin settling, I reached for my phone by habit, then stopped. I had powered it off before leaving Westlake, unwilling to field the barrage of messages that had continued throughout the day. Daniel, his mother, even his brother Jason had all tried to contact me. Only Sophia had maintained a dignified silence. Instead of the phone, I picked up the leather-bound journal I'd packed on impulse. Its pages were blank, purchased months ago with vague intentions of documenting recipe developments but never used. Now, I opened to the first page and began to write, not recipes, but feelings. Raw, unfiltered impressions of the past 24 hours. Questions that swirled through my mind. Memories that suddenly appeared in a new light, given what I now knew. When had Daniel stopped supporting my dreams? When had I started making myself smaller to fit his expectations? When had I begun censoring my thoughts, moderating my ambitions, adjusting my behavior to avoid Victoria's disapproval? The questions flowed onto the page, ink sometimes blurring where tears fell unnoticed. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes grew heavy, until the confused tangle of emotions began to resolve into distinct threads I could examine individually. When I finally slept, it was deeply and without dreams. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through windows I'd forgotten to curtain, and the unfamiliar sound of birdsong rather than city traffic. For a moment, I lay disoriented, the events of the previous day seeming distant and dreamlike. Then reality reasserted itself, bringing with it a strange mix of pain and something unexpected: relief. The relief surprised me more than the pain. It suggested that some part of me had been waiting for the breaking point, had perhaps even welcomed it as liberation from a situation that had slowly become unbearable. This insight troubled me, implying a level of self-deception I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging. I rose and made coffee, carrying the steaming mug onto the porch where I watched mist rise from the valley below. The day stretched before me, empty of obligations or expectations for the first time in years. No restaurant to manage, no husband to accommodate, no mother-in-law to placate. Just hours to fill however I chose. The freedom was dizzying, almost, frightening in its boundlessness. I decided to start with the familiar: cooking. After surveying the available ingredients, I set about making breakfast, losing myself in the rhythm of chopping, whisking, seasoning. I prepared enough food for 3 people, a habit from cooking for Daniel and often his visiting family members. The realization made me pause, spatula in hand, as I contemplated the half-empty skillet of eggs. How many other habits had I developed to accommodate a life that no longer existed? How much of my daily routine, my reflexive behaviors, my default responses had been shaped around Daniel and his family's expectations? I finished cooking but served myself a normal portion, refrigerating the rest for later. As I ate, I began a new list in my journal, titled simply, Reclamation. Under it, I wrote, "Cook only what I want to eat. Serve portion sizes that make sense for me." It seemed small, insignificant even, but it felt like a beginning. After breakfast, I explored the cabin's surroundings, discovering a network of hiking trails accessible directly from the property. I chose one that followed the stream I'd heard the previous evening, its path gently ascending through pine and aspen groves. The physical exertion felt good, driving out the circular thoughts that had dominated my mind since Victoria's announcement. I walked for hours, stopping occasionally to rest or simply absorb the scenery. The forest's quiet majesty put my personal troubles into perspective. These trees had stood witness to decades of human dramas, would continue standing long after my crisis had resolved one way or another. There was comfort in that continuity, that indifference. When I returned to the cabin, pleasantly tired and sun-warmed, I added to my reclamation list, spend time in nature regularly. Remember my place in the larger world. The pattern established itself over the next several days. Mornings began with coffee on the porch and journaling, followed by either hiking or exploring the small towns scattered throughout the mountain region. Afternoons I devoted to cooking, not the precise, performance-oriented cuisine I created at Mariposa, but experimental, personal dishes that followed no rules but my own preferences. Evenings were for reading, bathing, and more writing. I turned my phone on once, briefly, 4 days into my retreat. The notification count was staggering: 37 missed calls, 63 text messages, 22 voicemails, 41 emails. The digital avalanche felt suffocating. I forwarded essential messages to my alternate email address, then powered the phone off again, unwilling to breach the sanctuary I'd created. Most messages were from Daniel, his tone evolving from defensive to pleading to angry and back again. Victoria had sent several texts of her own, ranging from coldly critical to faux concerned. There were supportive messages from my brother Marcus, and a few close friends who had heard something had happened, though details were evidently still vague. Most surprising were 3 messages from Jason, Daniel's brother. "Elena, I'm sorry about what happened. Truly. I should have told you what was going on. Just wanted you to know not everyone in this family thinks you're in the wrong here. What Daniel and my mother did was inexcusable. If you need anything at all, let me know. No strings attached, no reporting back to them. You've always been too good for this family, honestly." I hadn't expected loyalty from anyone in the Castillo family. Jason and I had always been friendly, but never close. His messages were the only ones I briefly considered responding to, but in the end, I maintained my silence. Any crack in that wall might let in more than I was prepared to handle. On the 7th day of my retreat, I woke with a clarity that had been absent since the disastrous anniversary dinner. The constant internal dialogue, analyzing every interaction with Daniel, every subtle slight from Victoria, every warning sign I'd ignored, had finally quieted. In its place was a single, unmistakable certainty. I could not return to my marriage. The realization wasn't angry or bitter. It was simple, factual, like recognizing that water is wet or fire is hot. The relationship with Daniel had been fundamentally unbalanced, gradually eroding my sense of self. The affair with Sophia was merely the final, irrefutable evidence of a breakdown that had been occurring for years. I took my coffee to the desk, in the study, and opened my laptop for the first time since arriving. It was time to be practical. I sent an email to Amara, my lawyer, requesting a consultation to discuss filing for divorce. I contacted Miguel at Mariposa to check on operations and confirm I'd be extending my absence for another week. I wrote to Marcus, explaining the situation, in broad strokes, and asking him to give me a few more days before calling. Then, feeling both lighter and more grounded than I had in months, I closed the computer and returned to the porch. The valley spread before me, mist burning off to reveal the patchwork of forests and meadows below. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with pine-scented air, and added to my reclamation list, trust my instincts. They were right all along. That evening, as I prepared dinner, my satellite phone rang, the emergency line Olivia had insisted I keep active. I answered warily, spatula in hand. Elena? It was Marcus, his voice tight with concern despite my request for space. I know you said to wait, but there's something you should know. Daniel showed up at my house today. My hand tightened on the phone. What did he want? To find you, obviously. He's been calling everyone, showing up at people's workplaces, making a scene. He came to the construction site today, interrupted a client meeting. Marcus, a successful contractor, rarely sounded rattled, but his tone suggested Daniel's visit had crossed professional boundaries. What did you tell him? That I didn't know where you were, which is true enough since you didn't share specifics. But Elena, he seems desperate, unhinged almost. He was talking about hiring a private investigator, claiming you might be unstable after what happened. Cold anger replaced the peace I'd cultivated over the past week. He's trying to rewrite the narrative. Make me the unstable one when he's the one who had an affair. That's what I figured, Marcus agreed. Listen, you know I respect your need for space, but maybe it's time to have your lawyer communicate something official. Set some boundaries before this escalates further. I sighed, knowing he was right. My retreat had been necessary for my mental clarity, but I couldn't hide in the mountains forever. The real world, with all its complications and confrontations, awaited my return. I'll talk to Amara tomorrow, I promised. And Marcus, thank you for looking out for me. Always, Hermana, always. After we hung up, I stood motionless in the kitchen, dinner preparations forgotten as I processed this new development. Daniel's behavior, showing up at Marcus's workplace, threatening to hire investigators, crossed a line from persistent to controlling, perhaps even dangerous. The notion that he might try to paint me as unstable was particularly troubling, suggesting a willingness to destroy my reputation to regain control. I completed dinner on autopilot, my appetite diminished by this unwelcome intrusion of reality into my mountain sanctuary. As I ate, I contemplated my options. I could extend my stay at Pinecrest, further postponing the inevitable confrontation. I could relocate somewhere more remote, essentially going into hiding. Or I could return to Westlake and face Daniel directly, establishing boundaries on my own terms rather than allowing him to define the narrative. The last option, while most intimidating, felt like the only one that honored the strength I'd been rediscovering. Running further would only reinforce whatever story Daniel was constructing about my emotional state. Decision made, I spent the evening organizing my thoughts in preparation for the next day's call with Amara. I needed a clear strategy, legal, financial, and personal, before re-entering the orbit of Daniel and Victoria Castillo. My consultation with Amara the following morning was bracing but productive. She confirmed my concerns about Daniel's behavior, noting that attempts to portray a spouse as mentally unstable were unfortunately common tactics in contentious divorces. The good news, she explained, is that we have solid documentation of Mariposa's separate ownership and clear evidence of his infidelity. The bad news is that the Castillos have significant influence in Westlake. This could get messy in ways that extend beyond the legal proceedings. I can handle messy, I assured her, realizing as I spoke that it was true. The woman who had tolerated years of subtle undermining from Victoria would have avoided conflict at all costs. The chef who had built Mariposa from nothing knew how to weather storms. We agreed on next steps. Amara would prepare formal divorce. Papers, I would return to Westlake the following day, and we would meet to review the filing before presenting it to Daniel. In the meantime, she would send him a cease and desist letter regarding his attempts to locate me through family and friends. One more thing, Amara said before we concluded the call. Consider where you'll stay when you return. The house you shared with Daniel might not be the best environment, legally or emotionally. It was a consideration I'd been avoiding. The Craftsman house had never felt fully mine, but it contained my belongings, my kitchen equipment, the physical artifacts of 7 years of marriage. The thought of Daniel continuing to live there, perhaps eventually bringing Sophia into that space, created a hollow feeling in my chest. I'll figure something out, I promised. After the call, I began packing systematically, sorting through the clothes and personal items I'd brought to Pinecrest. The process felt symbolic, a physical manifestation of the mental sorting I'd been doing all week. Some things would return with me to Westlake, essential for whatever came next. Others I could leave behind, no longer necessary for the person I was becoming. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "How's the mountain air? Ready for visitors yet?" I smiled, grateful for her respect of my boundaries while still checking in. I responded, "Coming home tomorrow, actually. Need a place to stay that isn't the house. Any ideas?" Her reply was immediate. "My spare room is yours for as long as you need. No discussion necessary." Relief washed over me. Of course Olivia would offer without hesitation. Of course she'd understand the complexity of returning to Westlake without having a safe harbor. I accepted gratefully. One logistical problem solved. That evening, I stood on the porch watching darkness gather over the valley, mentally preparing for the transition ahead. The 10 days at Pinecrest had transformed me in subtle but fundamental ways. I'd arrived confused, hurt, seeking answers about my marriage. I was leaving with clarity about my future, alone, but stronger for it. I added a final entry to my reclamation list. Remember this feeling, the certainty, the peace that comes with honoring your own truth. The drive back to Westlake the next day felt shorter than the journey to Pinecrest had been. Perhaps it was the purpose that propelled me forward, or perhaps simply the familiarity of returning rather than venturing into the unknown. Either way, as the landscape transformed from mountain forest to rolling hills to suburban developments, I felt my resolve strengthening rather than wavering. Olivia met me at her apartment with a fierce hug and a glass of wine, though it was barely noon. "Welcome back to civilization," she said, helping me carry my bags inside. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Ready to end this chapter properly and begin the next one. Her apartment was exactly as I remembered, eclectic artwork covering the walls, mismatched, but comfortable furniture, thriving plants in every available corner. It felt nothing like the sterile perfectionism of the house I'd shared with Daniel, and I found myself relaxing into its chaotic warmth. "So what's the plan?" Olivia asked as we settled on her oversized couch, Jasper the cat immediately claiming my lap. "Besides the legal stuff, I mean." I scratched behind Jasper's ears, considering the question. "I need to go to Mariposa today, check in with Miguel, make my presence known. If Daniel's been creating narratives about my stability, the best counter is to be visibly competent and in control." "Smart," Olivia nodded. "Public but professional. What about the house? Your things?" "That's the next challenge. I need to..." retrieve essential items and documents, but I'd rather not have another confrontation with Daniel if I can avoid it. We could go when he's at work, Olivia suggested. Or I could create a diversion while you sneak in the back. She waggled her eyebrows dramatically, making me laugh for what felt like the first time in ages. Let's start with the direct approach, I decided. I'll ask Amara to contact him, establish a time when I can collect some belongings without him present. If that doesn't work, then we can consider your diversionary tactics. The remainder of the afternoon passed in practical preparations, unpacking the essentials at Olivia's, reviewing the draft divorce papers Amara had emailed, and mentally preparing for my return to Mariposa. By 5 o'clock, I had changed into one of my best chef's jackets and dark jeans, an outfit that made me feel professional and capable, armor of a sort. Want me to come with? Olivia offered as I gathered my keys and bag. I considered it briefly, then shook my head. This is something I need to do alone, but thank you. The drive to Mariposa felt surreal, like returning to a familiar dream after a long absence. Evening service would be beginning soon, the rhythm of the restaurant shifting into its nightly choreography of preparation and execution. I parked in my reserved space behind the building, noting with a twist of irony that the spot next to it, reserved for the executive chef's spouse, was empty. Daniel had never used it. Never having known his wife was more than a consultant. I entered through the kitchen door, the familiar sounds and smells washing over me like a homecoming. The staff was in full pre-service mode, Miguel calling orders, line cooks prepping stations, servers reviewing the night's specials. The bustling activity paused momentarily as I appeared, a ripple of surprise moving through the kitchen. "Chef!" Miguel exclaimed, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. "We weren't expecting you back yet." "Change of plans," I explained, moving through the kitchen with practiced ease, inspecting preparations as I went. Everything was in perfect order, exactly as I would have arranged it myself. Miguel had performed admirably in my absence. Everything. "Looks excellent, Miguel. You've done an outstanding job." He ducked his head slightly, pleased but modest. "The team has been amazing, but we're all glad to have you back." I spent the next hour reintegrating myself into Mariposa's operations, reviewing reservations, discussing menu adjustments, greeting staff members who had become like family over the past 3 years. No one mentioned the disastrous anniversary. Dinner directly, though I caught curious glances and concerned expressions. News had clearly spread, but professional discretion prevailed. As dinner service began, I moved toward the dining room to speak with Javier, our host, about the evening's reservations. The restaurant was filling nicely, the ambiance exactly as I'd designed it. Warm lighting, conversation at a pleasant hum, servers moving with practiced grace between tables. Mariposa was thriving, with or without my daily presence. I was discussing a special request from a regular patron when I sensed a disturbance at the entrance. Looking up, I saw Victoria Castillo. At the host stand, imperious in a tailored suit, her silver hair impeccably styled. Beside her stood Robert, Daniel's father, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Javier caught my eye, his expression clearly asking if he should send them away. I shook my head slightly and moved toward the entrance, straightening my chef's jacket as I approached. Whatever Victoria wanted, I would face it directly, on my territory, surrounded by people who respected me as a professional. "Victoria, Robert," I greeted them, my voice calm and neutral. "I don't believe you have a reservation this evening." Victoria's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by my composed demeanor or unexpected presence. She recovered quickly, her expression settling into practiced civility. "Elena," she returned coolly, "we heard you were back in town. We need to discuss the situation with Daniel." "This isn't the appropriate venue for such a discussion," I replied, gesturing to the dining room behind me. "As you can see, we're in the middle of service." "This cannot wait," Victoria insisted, her voice rising slightly. "You've been unreachable for over a week while my son has been beside himself. This childish disappearing act needs to end. Several nearby diners turned at her elevated tone, curiosity piqued by the potential drama unfolding at the entrance. Robert placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Victoria," he murmured, "perhaps Elena is right about the timing." I maintained my professional composure, though internally I marveled at Victoria's audacity. She had announced her son's affair with my cousin at my anniversary dinner, yet I was the one being childish for taking time to process this betrayal. "If you'd like to have a civilized conversation," I offered, "I can arrange for a private room after service concludes. Alternatively, you're welcome to contact my attorney to schedule a formal discussion about the divorce proceedings." Victoria flinched visibly at the word divorce, as if I'd struck her. "There's no need for such drastic measures," she hissed, lowering her voice but intensifying her glare. "Daniel made a mistake, certainly, but throwing away a marriage over one indiscretion is ridiculous." "An 8-month affair is hardly one indiscretion," I countered, matching her hushed tone. "And as I recall, you seemed quite pleased about this particular mistake during our anniversary dinner right here at Mariposa." Victoria's face flushed, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Behind her, I noticed Javier hovering protectively, ready to intervene if needed. Other staff members had positioned themselves strategically nearby, a silent show of support that warmed me unexpectedly. "You're making a terrible mistake," Victoria warned, her voice low and intense. "The Castillo family has connections throughout Westlake. Do you really think your little restaurant will survive if you proceed with this divorce?" The threat was unmistakable, and for a moment I felt a flash of the old fear. The worry about disappointing Daniel's family, about not measuring up to their expectations, about facing their disapproval. Then I remembered the quiet strength I'd reclaimed at Pinecrest, the clarity I'd found about my worth independent of their validation. "Mariposa was succeeding long before I married Daniel," I said evenly, "and it will continue to thrive long after our divorce is finalized. As for connections, you might be surprised by how many people in Westlake prefer authentic cuisine to social intimidation." I gestured toward the dining room, where several tables were occupied by local business leaders, city officials, and cultural influencers, people who came for the food and atmosphere I had created, not out of obligation to the Castillo name. Victoria's expression hardened, her mouth compressing into a thin line. "This isn't over, Elena. Not by a long shot." "On that, we agree," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "But the continuation won't be happening tonight in my restaurant, during dinner service. Good night, Victoria. Robert." I nodded to Javier, who smoothly stepped forward to escort them out, his professional manner masking what I suspected was considerable satisfaction. As they departed, I noticed Robert glancing back, an unreadable expression crossing his face, something between apology and resignation. When they had gone, I took a moment to steady myself, to process the confrontation and its implications. Victoria's threat couldn't be dismissed entirely. The Castillos did indeed have significant influence in Westlake, connections that could potentially impact Mariposa if wielded vindictively. Yet standing my ground had felt right, necessary, a demonstration to myself as much as to Victoria that I would not be intimidated. "Chef?" Miguel approached cautiously. "Everything okay?" I smiled at him, genuinely touched by the concern evident in his expression. "Everything is exactly as it should be, Miguel. Let's get back to what we do best, shall we?" For the remainder of the evening, I immersed myself in the familiar rhythm of service, consulting with the kitchen team, visiting select tables to greet regular patrons, monitoring the flow of dishes from kitchen to dining room. By closing time, the encounter with Victoria had receded somewhat, overshadowed by the satisfaction of being fully engaged in my element. As the last customers departed and the staff began cleanup procedures, I gathered everyone for a brief meeting. Standing in the kitchen that had been my true home for 3 years, surrounded by people who valued my work rather than my connection to the Castillo name, I felt a surge of gratitude and resolve. I want to thank all of you for maintaining Mariposa's standards in my absence, I began, looking around at the tired but attentive faces, and for your discretion regarding certain recent events. A murmur of supportive responses rippled through the group. No one had mentioned the anniversary dinner disaster directly, but everyone clearly knew something significant had happened. Moving forward, there will be some changes in my personal life that may occasionally affect my presence here, I continued, choosing my words carefully. However, Mariposa remains my primary focus and commitment. Nothing about our vision, our standards, or our team dynamic will change. I paused, considering how much to share, then decided on honesty within professional boundaries. I will be filing for divorce from Daniel Castillo. This may create some complicated dynamics in the community. If you encounter any unusual situations, difficult reservations, cancellations, or inquiries about me personally, please direct them to management rather than handling them yourselves. The staff exchanged glances, absorbing this information. Then Lucia, our most experienced server, spoke up. "We've got your back, chef. All of us." Nods and murmurs of agreement followed her statement, a show of solidarity that tightened my throat unexpectedly. These people knew me as a professional, as a leader, as the creator of Mariposa. Their loyalty wasn't to the Castillo name, but to what we had built together. "Thank you," I managed, emotion threatening to overcome my professional composure. "That means more than you know." As the team dispersed to complete closing duties, Miguel approached with a folder. "These came for you yesterday," he said quietly, handing me a stack of papers. "Legal documents, I think." I kept them in the safe. I nodded gratefully, glancing at the return address, Amara's law firm. "Thank you, Miguel, for everything." Later, alone in my office reviewing the finalized divorce filing, I reflected on the evening's events. Victoria's appearance had been intimidating, certainly, but also clarifying. She had shown her hand too early, revealing both her desperation and her tactics. I was forewarned now, prepared for whatever pressure the Castillo family might attempt to exert. More importantly, the confrontation had confirmed what my retreat to Pinecrest had helped me realize. I was stronger than I had believed, more capable of standing my ground than years of subtle undermining had led me to think. The woman who had faced Victoria tonight was not the same one who had silently endured her critical comments for 7 years, who had gradually diminished herself to fit the role of Daniel's accommodating wife. When I finally left Mariposa that night, exhausted but centered, I knew with certainty that returning to Westlake had been the right decision. Running away might have provided temporary relief, but standing firm, on my territory, surrounded by my people, had offered something far more valuable, the conviction that I could not only survive this chapter's end, but thrive in whatever came next. Morning light spilled through Olivia's kitchen window, illuminating the papers spread across her dining table. I traced my finger along the line marked Petitioner, pen hovering above the signature space. Once I signed these divorce papers, there would be no turning back. 7 years of marriage, reduced to legal terminology and asset divisions. "You don't have to do this today," Olivia said gently, setting a mug of coffee beside me. "Amara said you have time to review everything." I looked up at my friend, appreciating her concern but certain of my decision. "No, it needs to be today. The longer I wait, the more opportunity Daniel has to control the narrative." The memory of Victoria's threat at Mariposa still lingered, a reminder that the Castillo family wouldn't simply accept my decision and move on. Daniel had already begun reaching out to my friends and family, telling his version of events, that I had overreacted to a misunderstanding, that I was being emotionally unstable, that Victoria had misspoken at the anniversary dinner. I signed my name with steady hands, the pen making a satisfying scratch against the heavy paper. Elena Castillo, soon to be Elena Reyes again, reclaiming not just my name, but my identity. There, I said, straightening the stack of papers. Amara. We'll file these today, and Daniel will be officially served tomorrow. Olivia squeezed my shoulder, a silent gesture of support. What's next on the battlefield agenda, General? I smiled at her attempt to lighten the mood. Retrieving more of my belongings from the house. Amara contacted Daniel's lawyer, and they've agreed I can go this afternoon while Daniel's at work. Want me to come with you? I've been working on my intimidating bodyguard face. She scrunched her features into an exaggerated scowl that made me laugh despite the weight of the morning. Actually, Marcus is meeting me there. Daniel's less likely to show up unexpectedly if my brother's present. It wasn't that I feared Daniel physically, but his emotional manipulation was easier to resist with allies nearby. Smart, Olivia nodded. And afterward? Staff meeting at Mariposa. We're launching a new seasonal menu next week, and I need to finalize the dishes with the team. I sipped my coffee, grateful for the normalcy of work decisions, the familiar territory of culinary planning where I knew my worth and capabilities without question. Later that morning, I met Amara at her office to hand over the signed divorce papers. Her corner suite in one of Westlake's sleek downtown buildings exuded quiet confidence. Tasteful artwork, comfortable but elegant furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the harbor. It was the domain of someone who knew her value, who had built a career on competence rather than connections. These look in order, she said, reviewing my signatures. I'll file them immediately. Daniel should be served tomorrow, and then we'll see what kind of response his attorney provides. Do you anticipate problems? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Amara's expression was measured, professional. Based on his behavior so far and your description of Victoria's involvement, yes. The Castillos aren't accustomed to situations they can't control. We should prepare for some resistance, particularly regarding Mariposa. But the restaurant is clearly mine, I pointed out. I purchased it with inherited funds before we were married. Daniel's name isn't on any of the paperwork. True, and legally that makes it separate property, Amara agreed. But Daniel could argue that marital funds were used for improvements or operating costs, that your work at Mariposa diminished your contributions to the marital home, or any number of creative interpretations. It probably won't succeed, but it could complicate and prolong proceedings. I absorbed this information, mentally adding it to my growing list of potential obstacles. What's your advice? Document everything, she said without hesitation. Financial records, communications, any interaction with Daniel or his family. Forward emails, save texts, record significant phone conversations if legal in the situation. And maintain absolute professionalism in public settings. If they're trying to paint you as unstable or unreasonable, your behavior needs to consistently contradict that narrative. I nodded, already implementing most of these strategies. And the house? Our joint property? That's where negotiations will likely center, Amara explained. It was purchased during the marriage with joint funds, so it's clearly marital property. You have several options: selling and dividing proceeds, one of you buying out the other's share, or using it as a bargaining chip for other considerations. The house had never felt truly mine. Its location and style selected more to please Daniel's family than to reflect our personal preferences. Still, it contained years of my life, belongings that held both monetary and sentimental value. I don't want to live there again, I decided, but I want a fair settlement for my portion of the equity, and I need to retrieve my personal belongings safely. Amara made notes, nodding. We'll include that in our initial proposal. Speaking of personal belongings, you're scheduled to collect items this afternoon, correct? Remember, take only what's clearly yours: personal items, clothing, professional, equipment, leave joint purchases, and anything questionable for the formal division of assets. The conversation shifted to logistics and timelines. If everything proceeded smoothly, a significant if, given the circumstances, the divorce could be finalized in as little as 6 months. More realistically, considering potential disputes over assets and the Castillo family's resources, we might be looking at a year or more. A year of legal battles, a year of encounters like the one with Victoria at Mariposa, a year of Daniel's attempts to reclaim control or save face. The prospect was exhausting. "One day at a time," Amara advised, seeing my expression. "Focus on the immediate next steps. Today, you're retrieving belongings and running your restaurant. Tomorrow, we file these papers. The rest will unfold as it comes." I left her office feeling both burdened and fortified. The path ahead would be challenging, but I had competent guidance, a clear strategy, and most importantly, the conviction that I was making the right decision. Marcus was waiting in his truck when I arrived at the Craftsman house that afternoon. He stepped out as I parked, his tall frame and protective stance immediately providing a sense of security. My brother had always been my defender, from playground bullies to critical college professors, though he'd stepped back somewhat after my marriage to Daniel. Now he was fully back in that role, his expression serious as he surveyed the quiet residential street. "No sign of Daniel or his car," he reported, embracing me briefly. "But let's work quickly just in case." I used my key to enter the house, bracing myself for the emotional impact of returning to the space I'd shared with Daniel. The familiar scent, a mixture of the lemon cleaning products our housekeeper used and the sandalwood candles Victoria had given us, triggered an unexpected wave of memories. Sunday mornings reading in the window seat, dinner parties around the large dining table, arguments that ended with strained silence in separate rooms. The gradual fading of passion into polite coexistence. "You okay?" Marcus asked, noting my hesitation in the entryway. I nodded, pushing past the momentary disorientation. "Just strange to be back. Let's start with my office." We moved through the house systematically, following the list I'd prepared. From my office, I collected my laptop, professional books, and the framed reviews of Mariposa that Daniel had never displayed. From the kitchen, my grandmother's copper pots, specialty knives, and handwritten recipe cards. From the bedroom, clothing, and jewelry, including pieces inherited from my grandmother that held both sentimental and monetary value. Marcus transported boxes to our vehicles while I continued gathering items, working efficiently but thoroughly. In the guest room closet, I found photo albums from before my marriage, pictures of culinary school graduation, my first restaurant job, family gatherings, that I'd stored away when Daniel commented they didn't match our home's aesthetic. The discovery reinforced how much of myself I'd gradually tucked away, minimized or hidden entirely during our marriage. We were almost finished when the sound of a car in the driveway froze us both. Marcus moved to the window, his posture tensing. "It's Daniel," he confirmed grimly. "And he's not alone." I joined him at the window, peering through the curtains to see Daniel emerging from his Audi, accompanied by his brother Jason. This was unexpected. Not just Daniel arriving during the agreed-upon time for my visit, but Jason's presence as, well, given his supportive messages during my retreat, I wondered which side he was truly supporting. "Should we leave?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the remaining boxes. I considered our options. We had every legal right to be here during the scheduled time. Most of my essential belongings were already loaded in our vehicles. Confrontation was inevitable at some point in this process. Perhaps it was better to face it now, with Marcus present, than alone later. "No," I decided. "We stay and finish, as planned. We have another 20 minutes according to the agreement." The front door opened and Daniel's voice called out, "Elena, are you here?" "In the guest room," I responded, keeping my tone neutral. "Marcus is with me." Footsteps approached, and Daniel appeared in the doorway, Jason hanging back slightly. Behind him, my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, looked simultaneously familiar and foreign. The same tall frame and handsome features, but tension had etched new lines around his eyes and mouth. He wore the charcoal suit I'd given him for his last birthday, a detail that struck me as either thoughtless or deliberately manipulative. "I didn't expect you back so soon," I said, continuing to fold a quilt my grandmother had made, placing it carefully in an open box. "Your assistant told Amara you'd be in meetings until 5. Daniel's gaze swept over the half-empty closet, the stacked boxes, Marcus's protective stance. Plans changed. I thought we should talk in person, not through lawyers. His voice held that persuasive tone I recognized from countless business dinners, the voice he used to close deals and manage difficult clients. "We're almost finished." "Here," I replied, deliberately misinterpreting his meaning. "We've only taken my personal belongings, as agreed." "That's not," Daniel began, frustration edging into his voice. "Elena, this has gone far enough. Filing for divorce? Moving out? All this because of one misunderstanding?" I looked at him directly, processing the audacity of calling his 8-month affair with Sophia a misunderstanding, especially after Victoria's public announcement. "There's no misunderstanding, Daniel. You had an affair. Your mother announced it at our anniversary dinner in my restaurant. And I'm choosing to end our marriage as a result. It's actually remarkably straightforward." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of agitation I knew well. My mother spoke out of turn. She misinterpreted my relationship with Sophia. Yes, I made a mistake, but it wasn't what Victoria implied. 8 months, I said quietly. According to Sophia herself, it was 8 months. That's not a mistake. That's a choice made repeatedly day after day. Behind Daniel, Jason shifted uncomfortably, his expression suggesting he was reconsidering his role in this confrontation. Marcus moved subtly closer to me, a silent show of support. "People overcome affairs all the time," Daniel insisted, his tone shifting to something more intimate, more personal, the voice he'd used in our early days together when convincing me of his devotion. "Marriages survive these challenges, Elena. They can emerge stronger. We could go to counseling, take some time to reconnect." The proposal might have tempted me once, in the woman I'd been before the anniversary dinner, before Pinecrest, before reclaiming my sense of self. Now it only highlighted how fundamentally Daniel misunderstood what had broken between us. "This isn't just about the affair," I explained, keeping my voice level despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "It's about years of subtle diminishment. It's about your mother's constant criticism and your silence in the face of it. It's about hiding my accomplishments because they didn't fit your family's expectations. The affair was just the final evidence that our values are fundamentally incompatible." Daniel's expression hardened, the persuasive mask slipping to reveal something colder, more calculating. "So you've made up your mind. Just like that. 7 years dismissed without even trying to repair what we built." "There's nothing sudden about this decision," I countered. "And what exactly did we build, Daniel? A marriage where I gradually became smaller to accommodate your ambitions? A partnership where your family's approval mattered more than my happiness? A relationship where you could maintain an 8-month affair while I worried about disappointing you?" The questions landed like physical blows, each one causing Daniel to flinch slightly. Behind him, Jason's expression had transformed from discomfort to something like respect, his gaze meeting mine with what appeared to be genuine regret. "You're being emotional," Daniel said dismissively, reverting to a tactic he'd often used in our disagreements. "Making sweeping generalizations. Because you're hurt. I understand that, but—" "No," I interrupted firmly. "I'm being clear-eyed for the first time in years. The divorce papers have been filed, Daniel. You'll be officially served tomorrow. We can proceed amicably, focusing on a fair division of assets, or we can make this difficult. The choice is yours." Daniel's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the skin, a tell I recognized from countless arguments, signaling his transition from persuasion to anger. "If that's how you want to play this, fine. But don't expect it to be simple. My family has resources you can't imagine, connections throughout this city. Your little restaurant, that's enough." Jason's voice cut through his brother's threat, surprising all of us. He stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Elena has every right to end this marriage, and threatening her business is beneath you." Daniel shrugged off his brother's hand, turning to face him with barely contained fury. "You're taking her side? After everything our family has done for you?" Jason didn't back down. "I'm not taking sides. I'm pointing out that threatening the livelihood of the woman you claim to want back is contradictory at best and cruel at worst." The brothers stared at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them that hinted at longer-standing tensions. Finally, Daniel turned back to me, his expression once again carefully controlled. "We're not finished discussing this," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "Once you've had more time to think, to process your emotions, you'll see that throwing away our marriage is a mistake." "My decision is made," I replied simply, "and our scheduled time here isn't finished. We'll be done in 15 minutes, as agreed." For a moment, I thought Daniel might refuse to leave, might insist on continuing this futile conversation. Then Jason touched his arm again, a gentler gesture this time. "Let's go, Daniel. Give Elena the space she's requested." Something in Jason's tone, perhaps its quiet authority, so different from his usual easygoing manner, seemed to reach Daniel. With a final measuring look at me, he turned and left, footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors. Jason lingered momentarily. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for my part in all of this. I should have told you what was happening sooner." Before I could respond, he followed his brother, leaving Marcus and me in a silence weighted with the aftermath of confrontation. "Well," Marcus said finally, "that was intense." He squeezed my shoulder. "You held your ground beautifully, Elena." I realized I was trembling slightly, adrenaline coursing through my system. "It's just the beginning." That was Daniel still believing he can change my mind? Once he accepts that isn't possible, things might get uglier. "Then we'll be ready," Marcus said simply. "Family surrounds you, Hermana. Real family, not people who claim the title while undermining you at every turn." We finished packing in thoughtful silence, both processing the encounter and its implications. As we carried the final boxes to our vehicles, I paused for a moment on the front porch, looking back at the house that had been the setting for this chapter of my life. Despite its beautiful architecture and carefully curated interior, it had never truly felt like home. That distinction belonged to the kitchen at Mariposa, to my childhood bedroom in my parents' modest house, even to Olivia's eclectic apartment where I was currently staying. "Ready?" Marcus asked, closing his truck's tailgate. I nodded, turning away from the house without regret. "Ready." The staff meeting at Mariposa that afternoon provided a welcome return to normalcy, to the professional world where my expertise was valued and my leadership respected. We reviewed the seasonal menu changes, discussed wine pairings, addressed staffing adjustments. No one mentioned my personal situation directly, though Miguel checked in privately after the meeting concluded. "Everything okay, chef?" he asked, helping me organize supplier order forms in my office. "You seemed a little distracted during the dessert discussion." I appreciated his perceptiveness and discretion. "Just a challenging day on the personal front. Nothing that will affect Mariposa." Miguel nodded, accepting my answer without pushing further. "The team is behind you, you know, whatever happens." His simple statement of support touched me deeply. "Thank you, Miguel. That means more than you know." After he left, I remained. In my office reviewing financial reports, deliberately focusing on concrete tasks to ground myself after the emotional turbulence of the confrontation with Daniel. Mariposa was thriving. Reservations consistently booked weeks in advance, critical acclaim continuing to build, profits steadily increasing. The success provided both validation and security as I navigated the uncertain terrain of divorce. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Dinner at my place tonight. Marcus and Juliana coming too. Non-negotiable family support evening." I smiled, grateful for these people who had stepped up, creating a safety net beneath me as I walked. This precarious tightrope. "I'll bring wine," I replied. As I prepared to leave, Javier knocked on my office door. "Chef, there's someone asking to speak with you. She's not on the reservation list, but she's quite insistent." A flicker of apprehension ran through me. "Victoria?" "No," he said, his expression suggesting he would have mentioned that particular visitor immediately. "She says her name is Sofia Martinez." Shock momentarily paralyzed me. Sofia, Daniel's mistress, the woman Victoria had announced as my replacement, was here at Mariposa asking to speak with me. My immediate instinct was to refuse, to have Javier politely but firmly turn her away. What possible conversation could we have that wouldn't be painful or inflammatory? Curiosity overcame my initial reaction. What did Sofia want? Was she here? As Daniel's emissary, sent to plead his case when his own attempts had failed. Or did she have her own agenda, separate from the Castillo family dynamics? "Where is she?" I asked, gathering my composure. "The bar," Javier replied. "I told her you might not be available, but she said she'd wait." I considered my options. Meeting with Sofia wasn't legally advisable. Anything I said could potentially be twisted or used in the divorce proceedings. Yet refusing to see her might appear weak or fearful, emotions I was determined not to display during this process. "Tell her I can spare 5 minutes," I decided. "I'll meet her in the private dining room." The space would provide privacy while still being visible to staff, a compromise between discretion and protection. Sofia was younger than me, 28 to my 34, though the difference seemed more pronounced in person than it had in the photographs I'd seen of her on Daniel's social media. She wore a conservative navy dress that screamed Castillo approval, her dark hair swept into a neat ponytail, her makeup subtle but precise. She stood when I entered the private dining room, her posture tense, hands clasped tightly before her. "Elena," she began, her voice higher and more uncertain than I remembered from our brief interaction at the anniversary dinner. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unexpected." "Unexpected is one word for it," I agreed, remaining standing, unwilling to suggest a longer conversation than the 5 minutes I'd allocated. "What can I do for you, Sofia?" She swallowed visibly, seeming to gather courage. "I wanted to speak with you directly, without Daniel or Victoria present, to explain." "No, not explain. To apologize. Although I know an apology isn't nearly sufficient." This was not what I had anticipated. I had expected justifications, perhaps accusations, maybe even some version of, "He was unhappy before I came along," that affair partners often tell themselves. Genuine contrition seemed improbable. "You're right," I said evenly. "An apology isn't sufficient for an 8-month affair with my husband." Sofia flinched, but didn't retreat. "I know. What I did was unforgivable, but I thought you should hear directly from me that I've ended things with Daniel. Completely. After that dinner." She shook her head, seemingly at a loss for words. "I saw things clearly for the first time. The way Victoria spoke about you. The way Daniel just sat there silently. It was cruel and calculating, and I suddenly realized I was participating in something I didn't fully understand." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. All I saw was discomfort and what appeared to be genuine remorse. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why does it matter to you what I think about the end of your relationship with Daniel? Because I made terrible choices that hurt another woman, she said simply. And because I don't want to be the person who could do that. I don't want to be Victoria's puppet or Daniel's consolation prize. She straightened her shoulders slightly. I've also resigned from the company. I'm moving to Seattle next week to start a new position. The information was unexpected, creating ripples through my understanding of the situation. If Sophia had truly ended the affair and was leaving Westlake, it changed certain dynamics, potentially removing one complication from the already complex divorce proceedings. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally, unsure how else to respond to this unanticipated development. And I wish you well in Seattle. Sophia nodded, seeming to understand that forgiveness wasn't on offer, merely civil acknowledgement. There's one more thing you should know, she added, hesitation evident in her voice. Victoria has been proactive in managing the family's image during this situation. She's been speaking with certain people in Westlake, restaurant critics, potential investors, social connections, suggesting that your behavior has been erratic, that Mariposa might become unstable under your leadership during the divorce. Cold anger replaced my cautious, neutral stance. She's trying to undermine my business. Yes, Sophia confirmed. Daniel may not even be fully aware of the extent of her efforts. Victoria operates independently when she believes she's protecting the family's interests. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small notebook. I wrote down the names I know she's contacted and what I heard her say. It's not comprehensive, but it might help you prepare. I accepted the notebook warily, still not entirely convinced of Sophia's motivations, but unwilling to reject potentially valuable information. Why would you help me against the Castillos? A complicated expression crossed her face. Regret, determination, something like self-recognition. Because I don't like who I became when I was involved with them, and because what they're doing to you isn't right. She gathered her purse, preparing to leave. That's all I wanted to say. I won't contact you again. As she moved toward the door, a question formed in my mind, one I hadn't allowed myself to consider during the past tumultuous weeks. Sophia, I called, halting her departure. Were you and Daniel? Are you in love with him? She turned back, her expression somber. I thought I was, or I convinced myself I was, to justify what we were doing. But I don't think love is supposed to require so much compromise of who you really are. She smiled sadly. Something I suspect you understand better than most. After she left, I remained in the private dining room, processing the unexpected conversation. Sophia's visit had provided valuable intelligence about Victoria's behind-the-scenes maneuvers, confirmation that I had been right to anticipate attacks on Mariposa as part of the divorce strategy. But it had also offered something less tangible, a glimpse of how the Castillo family's influence could reshape a person's identity and choices, a pattern I recognized all too clearly from my own experience. I opened the notebook, scanning the list of names Sophia had provided. Several were concerning. Food critics whose reviews could significantly impact Mariposa's reputation, potential investors I'd been cultivating for a possible expansion, even the chairman of the Westlake Culinary Institute's board of directors, where I occasionally taught specialized workshops. Victoria was being strategic, targeting pressure points that could damage both my business and my professional standing. My phone rang, displaying Amara's number. Elena, she said when I answered, her tone professionally measured but with an underlying urgency. I wanted to give you a heads up. Daniel's attorney just contacted me. They're planning to contest the divorce filing on grounds of abandonment, claiming your retreat to Pinecrest and subsequent refusal to attend counseling constitutes desertion of the marriage. They're also preparing motions regarding Mariposa, suggesting marital funds were used for operations. The aggressive legal approach didn't surprise me. especially after my conversation with Daniel earlier, and now Sophia's revelations about Victoria's behind-the-scenes campaign. The Castillos were mobilizing on multiple fronts: legal, social, professional, attempting to pressure me into retreating from my decision. Can they succeed? I asked, mentally calculating how long my financial reserves would last if Mariposa's business suffered during prolonged legal battles. Not likely, Amara assured me. Their abandonment claim is extremely weak given the circumstances, and we have solid documentation regarding Mariposa's funding. But they can make the process difficult, expensive, and public. She paused. Are you prepared for that possibility? I thought about my conversation with Sophia, about Victoria's systematic attempts to undermine my professional reputation, about Daniel's veiled threats regarding his family's resources and connections. The path ahead would be challenging, potentially costly in both financial and emotional terms. But the alternative, returning to a marriage that had slowly erased my identity, to a family that valued appearances over authenticity, was unthinkable. Yes, I said firmly, I'm prepared. Good, Amara replied, her tone suggesting approval of my resolve. In that case, let's discuss our counter-strategy. I believe it's time we moved from defensive to proactive positioning. As we discussed, legal tactics and potential responses to Victoria's social campaign, I felt a strange sense of clarity emerging from the chaos of the past weeks. The Castillos had declared war, assuming their superior resources and connections would inevitably force my surrender. What they failed to understand was that I had spent years in the pressure cooker environment of professional kitchens, had built Mariposa from nothing while maintaining a double life to protect my dream from their dismissal, had discovered reserves of strength during my retreat to Pinecrest that they couldn't begin to comprehend. They believed they were fighting to protect their family's reputation and Daniel's pride. I was fighting for my identity, my future, my right to exist undiminished. And that made all the difference. 1 year to the day after Victoria's announcement at our anniversary dinner, I stood in the kitchen of Abuela's, surveying the space that had transformed from vacant storefront to vibrant restaurant in a remarkably short time. The warm terracotta walls displayed black and white photographs of my grandmother cooking in her modest kitchen, her hands expertly forming tortillas, her smile radiating the joy she found in feeding those she loved. The open kitchen design allowed diners to witness the choreography of cooking that had always fascinated me as a child watching her work. 10 minutes until the doors open, Miguel reminded me, adjusting his chef's coat. I'd promoted him to head chef at Mariposa when I decided to split my time between both restaurants, a decision he'd earned through talent and loyalty during the turbulent months of my divorce. Is everything ready? I asked, though the question was merely ceremonial. I knew Miguel would have ensured every detail was perfect. Everything except the owner-chef, who needs to change, he replied with the friendly candor our years of collaboration had earned him. I glanced down at my casual clothes and laughed. Fair point. I'll be quick. In the small office behind the kitchen, I changed into the custom chef's jacket Olivia had given me as an opening day gift. Unlike the traditional white coats I wore at Mariposa, this one was deep blue with Abuela's embroidered in vibrant thread over my heart and Chef Reyes across the shoulder. The name still gave me a quiet thrill, reclaimed identity made visible. As I straightened the jacket, I caught sight of my reflection in the small mirror on the wall. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the one who had stood frozen in Mariposa's dining room a year ago, blood dripping from her palm as her marriage shattered publicly. That woman had been stunned, hurt, diminished by years of subtle erosion. This woman, with clear eyes, confident posture, and purposeful energy, had reclaimed not just her name, but her entire sense of self. The final divorce decree had arrived 3 weeks earlier, unceremoniously delivered among bills and advertisements. 7 years of marriage, dissolved into legal language and official stamps. I'd opened the envelope in my loft, morning light, streaming through the industrial windows, the space I'd carefully furnished to reflect my true aesthetic rather than someone else's expectations. The drawn-out legal process had been challenging, but ultimately straightforward. Daniel's initial aggressive tactics had gradually given way to resignation as it became clear my resolve wouldn't waver. The financial settlement was fair, the division of property clean. The emotion that washed through me upon seeing the final papers wasn't sadness or regret, but a profound sense of completion. One journey ended, another fully underway. Daniel had maintained a respectful distance since our mediation session, communicating only through attorneys to complete necessary paperwork. According to mutual acquaintances, he'd accepted a position with a prestigious firm in Chicago. A fresh start in a city where the Castillo name carried less weight. I wished him well, sincerely if distantly. Victoria had made no further attempts at contact after our final confrontation at Mariposa, though I occasionally felt her influence. In certain social invitations that mysteriously disappeared or business connections that suddenly cooled. These small obstacles no longer troubled me. For every door that closed, others opened, often leading to more authentic opportunities. The loft I'd purchased had become my sanctuary, a space that reflected my true preferences in every detail. From the commercially equipped kitchen to the small herb garden on the balcony, no trace of the Craftsman house's formal aesthetic remained. Instead, vibrant colors, eclectic art collected from local artists, and comfortable furniture designed for actual living rather than mere appearance filled the space. For the first time since leaving my parents' home, I had created an environment that nourished rather than constrained me. Most importantly, the past year had brought professional fulfillment beyond anything I'd previously allowed myself to imagine. Mariposa continued to thrive, its reputation solidified as one of Westlake's premier dining destinations. The culinary. West Profile had led to other media attention, including a segment on a regional cooking show and an invitation to compete in a prestigious chef's competition in San Francisco, which I'd won with a menu honoring my culinary heritage. And now, Abuela's, the culmination of a dream I'd once believed impossible, a restaurant that honored my grandmother's legacy while establishing my own distinctive voice in the culinary landscape. The concept had developed naturally during those cathartic cooking sessions at Pinecrest, when I'd reconnected with the fundamental joy that had drawn me to the kitchen in the first place. Unlike Mariposa's Mediterranean fusion approach, Abuela's focused exclusively on modern interpretations of traditional Mexican cuisine, elevating techniques and ingredients that had been foundational to my earliest culinary experiences. Elena? My brother Marcus appeared in the doorway, pulling me from my reflections. Everyone's here. I followed him into the main dining room where my chosen family had gathered for Abuela's soft opening. Olivia, her new girlfriend Tara, Marcus and his wife Juliana, my parents who had flown in from Arizona, and key staff members from Mariposa who had supported me throughout the turbulent year. These were the people who had stood by me when the foundations of my life shifted, who had reminded me of my strength when doubt crept in, who had celebrated each step forward without questioning my path. Before we open the doors, I said, raising a glass of champagne, I want to thank each of you. A year ago, I thought my world was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. I gestured to the space around us. Abuela's isn't just a restaurant. It's a testament to authenticity, to cooking, and living without compromise. To all of you who helped me remember who I really am, gracias. My mother wiped away tears as my father wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Their support had been unwavering, even from a distance. When I'd finally shared the full story of how my identity had gradually diminished during my marriage, my mother had confessed her own concerns, which she'd hesitated to voice for fear of seeming interfering. You stopped laughing, she'd told me during a long phone conversation. Every time we visited, you spoke less, laughed less, seemed less present. But you insisted everything was fine, so we tried to believe you. The evening unfolded like a dream. The small dining room filled with invited guests, sampling menu items inspired by my grandmother's cooking, but elevated through my professional training. Critics from local publications nodded appreciatively over plates of modern mole and reimagined chiles rellenos. Food bloggers photographed colorful compositions designed to honor tradition while embracing innovation. Every dish told a story of heritage reclaimed and reinterpreted through a lens of personal truth. I moved through the space with a sense of belonging I'd rarely experienced in the social settings of my married life. There, I'd always felt slightly off balance, trying to navigate Victoria's subtle criticisms and Daniel's shifting expectations. Here, surrounded by people who valued me for my authentic self rather than my adjacency to the Castillo name, I was completely at ease, proud of what I'd created, confident in my vision, comfortable in my own skin. Near closing time, as I circulated between tables gathering feedback and expressing gratitude, Javier approached with an uncharacteristic hesitation. "Chef, there's someone asking if they can speak with you. They don't have an invitation, but..." He paused, seeming unsure how to continue. "Victoria?" I guessed, steeling myself for one final confrontation. "No," he replied. "Jason Castillo." The unexpected name caught me off guard. Daniel's brother had shown momentary solidarity during our confrontation at the house nearly a year ago, but we'd had no contact since. What could he possibly want on this of all nights? "Where is he?" I asked. "Outside. He said he understands if you don't want to see him, but he has something important to share." I considered my options. The evening had been perfect, a celebration of new beginnings and authentic expression. Did I want to risk disturbing that harmony with a reminder of the past? And yet, Jason had been the one Castillo who had shown a glimmer of understanding, who had attempted, however belatedly, to stand against his family's manipulation. Perhaps he deserved a hearing. "I'll speak with him," I decided. Briefly. Jason waited on the sidewalk outside Abuela's, hands in his pockets, looking simultaneously like and unlike his brother, same tall frame and handsome features, but lacking Daniel's rigid posture and carefully maintained facade. When he saw me, genuine warmth spread across his face. "Elena," he greeted me, maintaining a respectful distance. "The restaurant looks amazing. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, curious but cautious. "Javier said you wanted to speak with me?" He nodded, suddenly appearing nervous. "I've been following your journey. The Culinary West profile, Mariposa's continued success, now Abuela's opening. You've accomplished extraordinary things this year." "I appreciate that," I said, still wondering about his purpose. "But I'm guessing you didn't come here just to compliment my professional achievements?" Jason smiled ruefully. "Always direct. I've always admired that about you." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I came to apologize properly, in person. I knew about Daniel and Sophia for months before that dinner, and I said nothing. I let my mother orchestrate that public humiliation without warning you. I failed as a friend and as a decent human being." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, touching something unexpected within me. Not the old wound of betrayal, which had long since healed, but appreciation for the courage such an acknowledgement required. "Why now?" I asked. "It's been a year." "Because tonight marks the anniversary," he replied. "And because I've been doing my own reckoning with the Castillo family dynamics. Daniel moving to Chicago was the catalyst. Watching him finally step away from our mother's influence made me question my own compliance." He shook his head slightly. "The way we treated you, the way we treat each other, it's not healthy. It never was." I studied his face, seeing the genuine struggle there, the conflict between family loyalty and personal integrity that had perhaps always troubled him beneath his easygoing exterior. "I accept your apology," I said simply. "And I wish you well on your own journey, Jason. It takes courage to question family patterns. Relief softened his features. Thank you. That means more than you know. He hesitated, then added, Daniel is doing better, by the way. Chicago has been good for him. He's seeing someone new, a professor of architecture at Northwestern. Someone very different from... He trailed off, perhaps realizing the comparison might seem insensitive. From me, I finished for him, surprised to feel genuine happiness at this news. Good, I'm glad he's finding his own path too. He sent this, Jason said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing an envelope. Asked me to give it to you if I thought the moment seemed right. No pressure to read it now or ever, just his own attempt at closure, I think. I accepted the envelope, feeling its weight in my hand. Not physical weight, but the emotional significance of this final communication from the man who had been my husband for 7 years. Thank you for bringing it. Jason nodded. Anyway, I won't keep you from your celebration. I just wanted to say my piece. Clear the air. Westlake. Isn't that big a city? We'll likely cross paths again. Next time, come inside, I said, the invitation spontaneous but sincere. Both restaurants welcome patrons who appreciate good food, regardless of last name. After Jason left, I remained on the sidewalk briefly, absorbing the unexpectedness of this final closure. The Castillo chapter of my life had ended not with drama or bitterness, but with this quiet exchange of acknowledgement and well wishes, a gentle closing of the door rather than a forceful slam. I glanced down at the envelope in my hand, considering whether to open it immediately or wait until I was alone. Curiosity won out. Inside was a simple card, Daniel's familiar handwriting covering both sides. Elena, I've written and rewritten this more times than I can count. None of my drafts seem adequate, but Jason convinced me that something, even if imperfect, is better than silence. First, congratulations on everything you've achieved this past year. Your success is well-deserved and entirely your own. Second, I want to apologize. Not just for the affair, which was inexcusable, but for the years of subtle diminishment that preceded it. I didn't recognize what was happening until you named it during our last real conversation. Chicago has given me perspective and, frankly, some much-needed therapy. I understand now how my need for control and my mother's influence created an environment where your light was deliberately dimmed. You were right to leave, right to reclaim yourself. I wish you nothing but continued success and happiness, Daniel. The words settled in me without the emotional turbulence they might once have caused. There was a time when such acknowledgement would have seemed like validation I desperately needed. Now it was simply an epilogue, appreciated, but not necessary. For my own sense of closure, I tucked the card back into its envelope and returned inside to the vibrant atmosphere of Abuela's. The celebration continued undiminished, laughter and conversation flowing as freely as the wine, the kitchen humming with purposeful energy, the space alive with exactly the vision I had carried through months of planning and preparation. I moved through the room, touching base with my team, thanking guests, fully present in this moment of culmination. Later, as the last guests departed and staff began the efficient cleanup that would prepare the restaurant for tomorrow's official opening, Olivia found me in the kitchen overseeing final organization. So, she said, bumping my shoulder gently with hers, was it everything you imagined? I looked around at the kitchen that honored my grandmother's memory while showcasing my own culinary voice, at the team that had helped transform vision into reality, at the space that represented not just professional achievement, but personal reclamation. More, I replied simply. So much more. The journey from that devastating anniversary dinner to this triumphant opening night had been neither straight nor easy. There had been legal battles and personal doubts, financial concerns, and emotional reckonings. But each obstacle had ultimately strengthened my resolve. Each challenge had clarified my vision. Each difficult choice had confirmed my capacity to trust my own judgment. I wasn't naive enough to believe that life would proceed without further complications. Running 2 restaurants would bring new professional demands. My growing public profile would create pressures I hadn't yet experienced. Relationships, romantic and otherwise, would require navigation with new boundaries and expectations. But I faced these future challenges standing firmly in my authentic self, no longer diminished by others' expectations or constrained by fear of disapproval. The woman who had once silenced her own voice to maintain harmony now spoke her truth without apology. The chef who had hidden her ownership of Mariposa now claimed her accomplishments openly and proudly. The daughter of immigrants who had downplayed her heritage to fit into the Castillo world now honored that heritage through every dish served at Abuela's. This was freedom, not the absence of challenges, but the presence of choices made from a place of self-knowledge and conviction. This was success, not as defined by Victoria's social metrics or Daniel's professional standards, but as measured by alignment between inner values and outer expression. This was me, Elena Reyes, complete and undiminished, finally the author of my own story. 3 months after Abuela's opening, I stood at its entrance alongside a photographer from Cuisine National, posing for what would become the magazine's cover image. The feature story, titled The Authentic Kitchen, Elena Reyes Transforms Personal Heritage into Culinary Revolution, would cement my place in the national food scene while introducing my philosophy to a broader audience. Just be natural, Chef Reyes, the photographer encouraged, adjusting her camera. Maybe think about what inspired your journey here. I smiled, relaxing into the moment as I considered the complex path that had led to this point. The devastation of betrayal, the sanctuary of Pinecrest, the reclamation of identity, the creation of something entirely new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Perfect, the photographer declared, reviewing the images. Absolutely perfect. Later that evening, after the interview concluded and the magazine team departed, I walked through Abuela's dining room during service, observing the seamless operation with quiet pride. Every table was filled, reservations booked solid for months ahead. The kitchen functioned with precision and passion, each dish emerging as a testament to heritage honored and creativity unleashed. At one corner table, I noticed a familiar figure, Jason, Castillo dining with a woman I didn't recognize. He caught my eye and nodded respectfully, a gesture I returned without hesitation. His presence no longer triggered anxiety or resentment. He was simply another patron appreciating good food, perhaps making his own journey toward authenticity. In the kitchen, I paused beside a young woman recently hired as a line cook, Maria, a culinary student who had approached me after a guest lecture at the Institute, her eyes bright with ambition and uncertainty. "How are you settling in?" I asked, watching her meticulously plate a sophisticated version of traditional soaps. "It's challenging," she admitted, "but in the best way. I've never worked in a kitchen where I could bring so much of myself to the food." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. That's the secret ingredient in every exceptional dish, the cook's authentic voice. "Chef?" Maria hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. "I wanted to thank you, not just for the opportunity, but for showing someone like me that it's possible, that we don't have to choose between heritage and innovation, between who we are and who the industry expects us to be." Her words touched something deep within me, the recognition that my journey had significance beyond my personal liberation, that by claiming my own authentic path, I had perhaps widened the trail for others to follow. "We contain multitudes," I told her, echoing words my grandmother had often said. "Never let anyone reduce you to a single ingredient when you're an entire menu." Maria smiled, returning to her station with renewed purpose. I continued my circuit through the kitchen, making small adjustments, offering guidance where needed, but mostly observing the beautiful choreography of professionals united by passion and vision. This, I realized, was the true victory, not just personal reclamation, but the creation of spaces where others could thrive authentically. Mariposa and Abuelas weren't merely restaurants. They were communities of shared purpose, environments where genuine expression was valued above conformity to external expectations. As I returned to my office to review the next day's special preparations, I passed the framed photograph of my grandmother that hung near the kitchen entrance. Her hands dusted with flour, her eyes crinkled with laughter, her presence radiating the joy of creating food from the heart. "Gracias, abuela," I whispered, touching the frame lightly, "for showing me the way home." The path forward stretched before me, unscripted and luminous with possibility. Whatever challenges or opportunities it might hold, I would face them as myself. Elena Reyes, chef and creator, daughter and friend, a woman who had learned through fire the uncompromising value of her own authentic voice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.